If you're preparing for PE Power exam, you'll probably agree that this is not a walk in the park. And if you're an internationally trained engineer, then there's certain aspects of this exam which probably make it even more difficult. In this video, we are going to go over some tips and recommendations that can help internationally trained engineers better prepare for PE Power exam. But before we dive into the content, I would really appreciate if you could like this video and click the subscribe button and click the bell icon if you haven't already done so. So if you're an internationally trained engineer who is planning to take the PE Power exam and pursue PE licensure in the United States, the very first obstacle that you're going to come across are your credentials, your education and academic background. So the good thing is that NCEES has a very streamlined process. They actually offer a service called NCEES Credential Evaluations. I'm going to include a link in this video where you can start your profile and get started with the process. Now, depending on the educational institute that you attended, if you attended an APET accredited university, then it's going to be a very simple and straightforward process, because essentially all APET accredited universities, their curriculum are taken at more or less at the face value. So you would probably still have to go through the evaluation process, but it would be very simple and straightforward. Now, if you're like 99% of the internationally trained engineers, I would say, the ones that at least that I've encountered, your degree is probably not ABET accredited. So you would have to go through the process, the requirements that are outlined by NCEES for credential evaluation. Now, you might also come across a couple of other service providers where you can get your credentials accredited, but my recommendation is to use NCEES for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that you will have a one-stop shop where your credential evaluations will be completed and they will be stored. And following that, I would recommend that you actually also create NCEES Record. So your credential evaluation report will be stored there. And in future, if you ever want to access it, or if you want to send it to a state and at the state board, you can very easily do that. The second reason is that NCEES is the governing body that conducts FE and PE exams, among some other exams. So pretty much all the states would take it at the face value. Once you have gotten that credential evaluation done, then you don't have to think about, okay, what if New Jersey will accept it, or whether New York will accept it, or California would accept it, because NCEES is the governing body and it's going to make your life easier. So that's the first obstacle. So my first tip on this point is to get started with this process as soon as possible. It's going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. All of it takes time. Sometimes I find like a lot of my students who are preparing for the PE Power exam, I recommend them that, start this process in parallel and also get going with your exam preparation, because this can take, depending on your particular scenario, maybe a few weeks up to a few months. I've had a couple of students for whom this whole process took more than 8-9 months. And the main reason was because they were not able to get the transcripts from their institution sent to NCEES directly because of COVID and other reasons, and they didn't have any contacts back home anymore. So it became tough. So my recommendation is use NCEES Credential Evaluation Service and get started with your degree evaluation as soon as possible. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about the PE Power exam. So the one section that I find a lot of internationally trained engineers who struggle or are intimidated by is codes and standards. Now, codes and standards, when you look at NCEES PE Power specification, according to the specification, the exam can contain anywhere between 10 to 15 questions, which translates roughly into close to 15 to 18.5, 19% of the entire exam weightage. Now, why is this problematic and why is this intimidating to a lot of internationally trained engineers? The simple answer is because they haven't used NEC, they haven't used NFPA 70E, they haven't used NESC and other NFPA codes that are required for the PE Power exam if they have just arrived in the US and are not currently working in design capacity, which is generally the case. So what I recommend my students who are using my PE Power course is to look at it as a great learning opportunity, because you are given an opportunity essentially to go through the code and standards. So if you're actively looking for a job, you can walk into an interview, and after having passed this exam, and even if you're preparing for the PE Power exam, you can mention that you are working on improving your understanding in this particular knowledge area. And in my PE Power exam preparation course, I have tons of lectures on NEC, NESC, and FPA codes. And the approach I take is that I explain and cross-reference the relevant code section, and I come up with a bunch of practice problems that are able to help improve your understanding by means of scenario analysis. So you're able to learn about the different code sections and also actively apply them in different problem settings. So code and standards, remember, is probably going to be the most challenging portion of the entire exam for you. But if you're using an effective exam preparation resource like my on-demand course, then it should help facilitate your process of learning the codes, and you will feel more and more confident in dealing with problems related to code. The third challenge that internationally trained engineers encounter when they're preparing for the PE Power exam is computer-based testing. Now, computer-based testing is being widely adopted all across the world, and over the last few years, FE exam has transitioned completely to computer-based testing, and PE Power exam in 2020 transitioned to computer-based testing. But if you haven't used computer-based testing, or if you haven't taken exams in a CBT format, then it might come across intimidating. Well, the one thing that I would recommend you is to remember that no matter what the testing format is, until and unless you understand the concept, are proficient in solving the problems, you won't be able to get it right. So focus on the fundamentals. Having said that, familiarity with CBT is very important because it will help ease your nerves, and you will also be able to make use of some of the features of the CBT. For example, your ability to go back and forth between the questions, your ability to flag the questions that you're finding challenging. And in my on-demand PE Power exam preparation course, I have tons of quizzes which are in the computer-based format. I have a full-length computer simulated practice exam which has 40 questions in the morning session and 40 questions in the afternoon session, just like the actual exam. And it has a very similar interface to the NCEES PE Power exam, and it gives you an opportunity to familiarize yourself with the CBT format. So two things that you need to remember is that the more comfortable you are dealing with CBT, obviously, the less you're going to fear it. And regardless of how you're being tested, until and unless you know the underlying concept, you're not going to be able to get it right. So spend 99% of your focus on making sure that you understand the underlying concept, and obviously try and become more familiarized with the CBT format as well. And my fourth and final tip for internationally trained engineers preparing for the PE Power exam is not to overthink it. Don't get that mindset of continuous self-doubt. Granted, you are not trained in US, but there are tons of great universities all across the world. And if you did fairly well in academics, I'm pretty sure that once you start using an effective exam preparation resource, most of that is going to come back to you surprisingly quickly. And things that you're not familiar with, it's a great opportunity for you to learn. So just dive into the exam preparation mode as soon as possible, because the fact is that if you're an internationally trained engineer, then PE license is going to do wonders for you. It will be a great equalizer. You'll be able to present your credentials in job interviews. You'll come across as more credible, and it will help your career to take off in the US. It will open many doors and many opportunities. So the upside of putting all of this hard work, investing your time and energy, and using the right resources is humongous for you. In summary, as an internationally trained engineer, you do have some challenges and obstacles and roadblocks that need to be overcome. But as I mentioned, the PE license potentially holds even more value for you as compared to somebody who has gone to university in the US. And if you're looking for effective exam preparation resources, I would recommend you to check out my on-demand PE Power exam preparation course. The details are given in the link. Thank you.